In the harsh, frozen north where the sun disappeared for months and fire was life or death, the Vikings thrived. Not just because of their axes or their ships, but because of what they put in their stomachs. Beneath the blood-soaked saga of warriors, raiders, and longships, there was something softer, earthier, ancient, a grain so vital, so rich in strength that it helped fuel everything from survival in ice-cold winters, to brutal ocean voyages, to wars that reshaped Europe. And yet, today, we barely speak its name. While we load our diets with chia seeds and quinoa, the Vikings had already mastered the ultimate superfood. They planted it, cooked it, stored it, and most importantly, they respected it. Not because it was trendy, but because it kept them alive. Modern science is only just rediscovering what Viking wisdom knew all along. This one humble grain was packed with fiber, energy, and resilience. It made their bodies harder, their minds sharper, their guts stronger. It was survival in seed form. And when the frost came, when game was scarce and the sea froze over, it was this grain that kept their families from starving. So what was it? What forgotten food lay at the heart of Viking strength? You've eaten it. Maybe. But not like they did. And not like this. Welcome to the story of the Viking grain that could outlast fire, famine, and empire. And why it might be the most powerful food you're not eating today. Part 1. The secret fuel of the North. Lost to time, buried in frost. It wasn't gold that kept the Vikings alive. It wasn't mead, or meat, or even the blood of their enemies. It was a seed. Small, stubborn, nearly invisible. But it held the secret to Viking survival. A grain so tough it could grow where almost nothing else would. So dense with nutrients it could fuel a warrior's body for days. And so forgotten that even most historians never talk about it. Barley. Not the kind you find in today's factory bread, but ancient, hard-won, cold-resistant 6-row Viking barley. This wasn't just food. It was fuel for raids, religion, survival, and strength. And today, it's almost extinct. Long before the raids, the Viking grain that fed a civilization. Before they were feared raiders, before longships cut through the icy seas, before their names echoed across Europe like thunder. The Norse were farmers, rugged, determined, obsessed with survival in a brutal climate. Their fields were frozen half the year. Their soil was rocky, thin, unforgiving. But they found a crop that refused to die. Barley, one of the first grains domesticated by humans, became the backbone of the Viking diet. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't rich, but it was strong. Like them. Why barley survived when other crops failed. In the icy north, wheat struggled. Oats needed warmer seasons. Rye came later. But barley? Barley laughed at frost. It grew quickly in harsh light and short summers. It demanded little, it gave a lot. And it stored well-dried, ground, boiled, fermented. A Viking family could harvest, dry, and store it to survive the winter, the raids, and the hunger. It was not just a crop. It was a life insurance policy written in dirt, the grain that crossed oceans. When Vikings sailed, whether to raid, settle, or trade, they brought 3 things: axes, amber, and barley. Barley flour was rolled into travel cakes, roasted in iron pans, and soaked into gruel. It filled bellies and fought scurvy. It didn't spoil, it didn't rot, it just lasted. Some archaeologists have even found barley residue on longship fragments, ancient crumbs that survived 1,000 years of sea and salt. This grain crossed oceans just like the men who harvested it. And without it, the Viking Age might never have happened. The warrior's meal, protein from plants. You imagine a Viking feasting on roasted boar, drinking mead from a horn. But the truth? A lot of Viking warriors ate porridge. Barley porridge. Thick, hot, filling. Sometimes mixed with herbs, dried berries, or wild greens. In lean times, it was mixed with blood. Yes, blood pudding, a high-protein mix of barley and animal blood boiled until firm. It was warrior food, brutal, efficient, nutritious, packed with iron, fiber, carbs, and minerals that kept muscles strong and minds sharp. This wasn't cuisine, it was combat food. Barley in the brain, smart fuel for harsh lives. Today we talk about superfoods quinoa, kale, chia. But ancient barley had it all. Beta-glucans to lower cholesterol. Slow-release carbohydrates for lasting energy. Antioxidants to fight disease. And even tryptophan, a precursor to serotonin critical for mental health. In a world of darkness, cold, and constant threat, mood and clarity meant survival. A Viking chieftain needed focus. A mother needed resilience. A child needed growth. Barley was their quiet ally. buried in ashes, forgotten in time. But then it vanished. As Europe modernized, new grains took over. Softer ones, easier to grind, easier to profit from. Viking barley, rough, hardy, and slow-growing, faded into obscurity. Today, only fragments remain, in museum seeds, in genetic archives, in remote northern farms still growing ancient strains passed down through generations, a superfood lost to modern convenience. But it's not gone forever, and its story isn't finished. Because now we ask the question, what else did the Vikings do that helped them live better than us? Coming up, how this grain shaped rituals, survival, alcohol, and even burial. Part 2, Blood, Beer, and Burial, how barley was sacred to Viking life and death. In Viking culture, barley didn't stop at the dinner table. It seeped into their rituals, their religion, and even their death rites. Because to the Norse, barley wasn't just food, it was sacred. From sacred ale to burial offerings, this grain shaped their beliefs, their myths, and their final journey to the afterlife. Ale of the ancestors, the sacred brewing of barley. The Vikings weren't wine drinkers. Mead was reserved for the gods and the elite. But ale, thick, smoky, barley-based ale was for everyone. Brewed in wooden vats, often with wild herbs like yarrow or juniper, Viking ale was central to life. It was drunk in wedding feasts, victory celebrations, sacrifices, and seasonal rites. Barley wasn't just sustenance, it became a bridge between the living and the divine. Drinking together wasn't just about getting drunk, it was about bonding tribes, honoring ancestors, and calling on gods like Thor or Freyr. The sumbel, a ceremonial drinking ritual, involved raising a horn of ale and making oaths before gods and kin. And that ale? It was barley-based, thick with meaning and memory. Buried with barley, the afterlife's first meal. Archaeologists have discovered barley grains in Viking graves, not spilled by accident but placed deliberately. Tucked in pots, scattered around bodies, burned with the dead. Why? Because the journey to the afterlife was long, and a warrior needed provisions. Barley was believed to carry life into death. A woman buried with barley might be seen as a nurturer even in death. A child fed barley porridge in life was given the same comfort in the grave. In some mounds, barley cakes were preserved hard, flat, meant to last forever. It was food for the soul. Seasonal rituals and the grain that measured time. The Vikings didn't use clocks or calendars the way we do, but they watched the sun, the soil, and the grain. Barley sowing and harvest marked sacred times in the Norse year. The festival of midsummer, when the sun stood still, often involved barley ale. So did winter nights, the ancient precursor to Yule, when offerings were made to the Disir, female spirits, and elves for protection. Barley was laid on stone altars, burned in sacrifice fires. Mixed with blood and blots, the Viking animal sacrifice rituals. It wasn't just nutrition, it was timekeeping, mythology, communion, barley and the otherworld, food for spirits. In Norse belief, the spirit world was always close. Elves, ancestors, and land spirits lived among the trees, under rocks, in mist and mountain. To keep them friendly, Vikings offered barley. It was sprinkled at burial mounds, left in forest clearings, baked into cakes for unseen guests. Barley was safe food, pure, humble, ancient. A token of respect to powers humans couldn't see, but dared not anger. The oath and the grain. There are even stories of Vikings placing a barley cake on the blade of a sword, then swearing an oath over it. Break the oath and you'd betray the gods, the ancestors, and the land that fed you. Grain held weight. It was truth, law, and binding. We think of barley as simple, plain, primitive. But to the Vikings, it was the thread that tied life to death, earth to spirit, and past to future. It fed warriors, fueled rituals, crossed into the afterlife. And yet, that's only half the story. Part 3, The Survival Engine, how Viking barley powered bodies, endurance, and immune strength. The Vikings didn't just survive, they thrived. In freezing winters, on endless seas, in brutal raids. But it wasn't magic. It wasn't just meat and mead either. Their true secret? A humble grain that modern science is now realizing may be one of the most complete survival foods in human history. Barley. Viking fuel, the caloric core of cold survival. Viking life burned calories like firewood. Rowing across the North Sea in 40-man longships. Chopping frozen timber for hours. Hiking mountains in heavy wool and fur. Swinging axes in raids or duels that could last minutes or hours. And yet, they rarely suffered long-term malnutrition. Why? Because barley porridge, often mixed with dried fruits, nuts, or animal fats, packed the perfect balance of carbs, fiber, and long-burning energy. It was like ancient granola meets battle rations, the kind of meal you could carry, reheat, or even eat cold, and it would still fuel a warrior all day. Fiber and fermentation, a gut built for war. Unlike refined grains, whole barley contains beta-glucans, soluble fibers that support gut health and stabilize blood sugar. In a time when Vikings often ate what they could hunt, forage, or steal, barley was their digestive anchor. The natural fermentation of leftover barley meals also helped grow beneficial gut bacteria, which modern medicine now links to immunity, mental health, and inflammation control. In short, Viking guts were probably tougher than yours. Cold weather warrior grain. Winter in Scandinavia wasn't just cold, it was cruel. Temperatures dropped below freezing for months. Frostbite and hypothermia were constant threats. But barley has a trick up its husk. It's what's known as a warming grain in many ancient traditions, dense, slow to digest, and capable of keeping body temperature steady during long nights or hunts. Eaten with butter, broth, or animal fat, barley became a kind of ancient thermal battery, releasing heat and energy slowly over hours. Perfect for warriors sleeping on planks beside a dying fire. The Viking microbiome, ancient health in a modern world. Recent research into ancient gut microbiomes. Yes, Viking poop has been studied, shows high diversity in gut bacteria. That diversity is a marker of strong immunity and low inflammation. Barley, with its prebiotic fiber and fermentation potential, was a cornerstone of that microbial health. Compare that to modern Western diets where ultra-processed foods have wrecked gut health. And it becomes clear, the Vikings weren't just warriors, they were unintentional nutritionists. Barley versus wheat, the battle of the grains. So why don't we eat barley today? Because wheat, especially refined wheat, won the battle of convenience. It's easier to process, fluffier, more profitable. But barley was once the standard grain of warriors, priests, and survivors across Eurasia, from Vikings to Sumerians. Unlike modern wheat, barley hasn't been overbred into nutrient weakness. Its structure still holds dense minerals, B vitamins, and immune-supportive compounds. It's a forgotten superfood not because it failed us, but because we forgot it. The truth is, the Viking body was a machine, and barley was the oil that kept it running. Strong bones, warm blood, steady hands. That's what this little grain offered, and still can if we learn to bring it back. Part 4, From Field to Fire, How Vikings Grew, Stored, and Cooked Barley to Survive. Year-round. Barley didn't come easy. The Vikings had to earn every grain, and in the brutal climates of Iceland, Norway, and Greenland, that meant engineering survival into the soil. Because barley wasn't just a crop, it was a lifeline, and they protected it like treasure. Barley in the north, growing on the edge of the world. Barley was the only cereal grain that could grow reliably in the harshest parts of Scandinavia. Why? Because it matured faster than wheat or rye in as little as 90 days. And it could withstand frost, poor soil, and erratic summers. In Norway, steep mountain plots were carved by hand and turned into tiered terrace farms. In Iceland, settlers brought barley seed in longships, knowing they had one shot to plant before winter. A failed harvest wasn't just a bad year, it meant starvation, disease, or forced migration. So Vikings built entire seasonal rhythms around their barley, planting in spring, guarding the crop all summer, then harvesting, quickly, methodically, before the frost came howling down the fjords. Storing gold, how Vikings preserved barley for the dark months. Once the harvest came in, the battle still wasn't over. Barley had to be dried, threshed, winnowed, and sealed, all without modern tools or preservatives. So how did they do it? First, they spread the stalks out to sun-dry, using precious sunny days to avoid mold. Then came manual threshing, using flails to beat the grain from the chaff. Next, it was winnowed, tossed into the wind so the light husks blew away, leaving only the heavy grain behind. After all that, barley was sealed in clay-lined pits, wooden bins, or sacks of animal hide, often buried in cool ground or hidden inside longhouse walls. Why such effort? Because one rotten sack could kill a family. Stored barley wasn't just food, it was future. The Viking kitchen, turning grain into survival. Now we get to the good part. How did the Vikings actually cook this stuff? The answer is simply and brilliantly. Porridge was king, a thick, hearty mix of barley, water, or milk, and whatever else they had. Dried apples, honey, goat fat, even chunks of preserved meat. It was boiled slowly in soapstone pots, often left to simmer overnight above the fire pit in the center of the longhouse. In richer homes, they added spices from trade, like cinnamon or pepper, making Viking porridge a rare blend of north and east. Then came barley flatbread, unleavened, baked on hot stones or iron griddles. Dense, chewy, and perfect for travel, these breads were wrapped in wool or bark and carried on raids and voyages. And when grain ran low, they soaked the last bits, mixed them with herbs, and turned them into fermented broth, equal parts food and medicine. Brewing life, barley as Viking ale. Of course, barley wasn't just for food, it was for ale. And not just any ale. Viking ale was sacred, used in feasts, rituals, oaths, and celebrations of the gods. Made from sprouted barley, called malt, honey, herbs, and wild yeast, Viking ale was brewed in massive wooden vats, stirred with family heirloom paddles, and often flavored with chas juniper, yarrow, bog myrtle. It wasn't always pleasant, but it was powerful, spiritually and calorically. A single mug of Viking ale could deliver energy, hydration, and courage before a battle or a long winter night. Grain security, theft, feuds, and fire. Barley was so valuable that grain theft was considered a serious crime in Viking society. In the Icelandic Grágás laws, stealing stored grain was punishable by banishment or death, especially in winter. Some longhouses even built secret compartments under the floor to hide barley reserves from rivals or raiders. And in times of conflict, warriors often burned the enemy's grain before anything else. Why? Because to destroy someone's barley was to destroy their future. You didn't need to kill a Viking to beat him, just starve him. So the next time you pour oats into a bowl or boil rice on a stove, remember this. Somewhere on a frozen hill, a Viking family once gathered around a fire, eating barley from a shared pot, food they planted, harvested, guarded, and cooked with their own calloused hands. Food that might decide if they'd see spring. And they didn't just survive on it, they thrived. Barley was the engine of Viking life, and what they did with it was nothing short of genius. Part 5. The Viking Diet versus Modern Nutrition. Why barley was the original superfood and what we've lost. We live in a world of superfoods. Kale, quinoa, chia seeds, avocados. Marketed as magic, health in a bowl, strength in a spoon. But over 1,000 years ago, Vikings had something even better, and they didn't need a Whole Foods label to know it. That forgotten Viking grain? It was barley. And pound for pound, calorie for calorie, it remains one of the most nutrient-dense, performance-driven, and climate-resilient foods humans have ever cultivated. A warrior's fuel, what barley did for Viking bodies. Let's talk numbers. Because Viking strength wasn't a myth, it was fueled by something real. A single bowl of barley porridge gave a Viking complex carbohydrates for long-term energy, high fiber content to regulate digestion, even on meat-heavy diets, magnesium and selenium, essential for muscle recovery and immune strength, beta-glucans, compounds that help lower cholesterol, balance blood sugar, and boost heart health. Unlike modern processed grains, Viking barley was whole, stone ground, and full of natural oils and micronutrients. It wasn't just sustenance, it was sustainable performance food, built for survival, warfare, endurance, and extreme weather. You want to survive a North Sea raid or a glacier crossing in Iceland? You don't need protein powder, you need barley. Gut of steel, Viking digestion, and disease prevention. Here's something we rarely talk about: gut health in ancient people. And the Vikings? They had it dialed in. Barley is loaded with prebiotic fiber, feeding beneficial gut bacteria that strengthen immunity, fight pathogens, and regulate inflammation. Combine that with fermented dairy, wild herbs, and bone broths, and you get a gut microbiome built like a shield wall. That's why archaeologists often find little sign of intestinal disease in preserved Viking remains, and why their teeth, despite no toothbrushes, are often in remarkably good condition. Their food didn't just fill them, it fortified them. Barley and brain, the Viking mind edge. Ever wonder how a Viking could stay alert for hours during a fog-drenched sea voyage, or keep calm in a tense negotiation with a rival chieftain? Their diet played a role. Barley contains B vitamins, essential for mental clarity, stress regulation, and memory. It also helped regulate blood sugar, meaning fewer crashes, more stability, and sharper decision-making under pressure. Viking sagas are filled with moments where cunning, wit, and timing made the difference between life and death. That kind of clarity doesn't come from sugar highs or starvation, it comes from stable, nourishing food. Lost to time, why we abandoned Viking superfoods. So if barley was this incredible, why did we stop eating it? 2 reasons: modern agriculture and industrial taste. After the Industrial Revolution, wheat became king. Easier to mill, fluffier in bread, and more profitable at scale. Barley, too coarse, too chewy, too peasant. So we turned it into animal feed and beer, ignoring its value as a daily food. And in doing so, we lost 1,000 years of hard-earned wisdom. The wisdom of a people who outlived winters, battled elements, fought disease, and still had the strength to build ships, conquer oceans, and raise families in wooden longhouses on the edge of the world. What we can learn, bringing Viking strength to modern life. Here's the twist. Barley's not gone. You can still buy it, cook it, eat it. It's cheap, it's ancient, it's powerful. And maybe, just maybe, the Vikings knew something we forgot. That strength doesn't come from protein bars and supplements. It comes from food grown with intention, eaten in community, and respected like a gift from the gods. So try it. Make porridge, bake flatbread, brew broth. Feel it for yourself. Because somewhere in that bowl is the memory of a people who faced the storm and stood their ground. Barley didn't make the Vikings invincible, but it made them endure. And in a world obsessed with shortcuts, maybe endurance is the greatest power of all. Part 6. More than a meal. The spiritual power of Viking food. In the end, barley wasn't just about staying alive. It was about being Viking, because to the Norse people, food wasn't fuel. It was fate. The sacred hearth where life and afterlife intertwined. Picture the Viking longhouse at dusk. The central hearth glows. Smoke curls toward a dark, timbered roof. Children doze near the fire. Warriors mend gear. Elders murmur tales of gods and monsters. In the middle, a pot of barley porridge, thick and fragrant. This was the heart of the home, the center of everything. The hearth wasn't just a place to cook, it was a portal, a spiritual gateway, a symbol of Frigg, goddess of hearth and home, and protector of kin. When barley simmered in that fire, it became more than food. It became memory, ritual, and promise. A promise that the clan would endure another night, another winter, another war. Barley and the gods, offerings in blood and grain. Vikings worshipped through sacrifice, not just of animals or enemies, but of harvests. At the Blot, sacred feasts held to honor gods like Odin, Thor, or Freyr, barley was always present. Sometimes brewed into ale, sometimes offered raw on stones, sometimes baked into dense cakes and burned in the fire as a gift to the divine. Odin, the Allfather, was said to have hung himself from Yggdrasil, the world tree, in search of wisdom, without food or drink for 9 nights. When Vikings fasted before ritual or battle, barley was often the first food they returned to, symbolizing not only rebirth, but divine strength returning to the body. To offer barley was to ask for luck, protection, or vengeance, depending on how it was given and to whom. Grain for the dead, the afterlife diet. Viking burial mounds sometimes held barley grains or barley cakes, carefully wrapped, placed beside weapons or bones. Why? Because the dead, like the living, needed sustenance on their journey. Some believed that in Valhalla, fallen warriors would feast endlessly, but to get there, their spirit had to be fed. Others thought the soul lingered with its kin until released through fire or offering. In both cases, barley was part of that sacred passage, a meal for the next world, a final gesture of honor and farewell. Feasts of belonging, barley as brotherhood. Raiding, farming, trading, all demanded trust among Vikings. And trust wasn't built with words alone, it was built with shared meals. When barley ale was poured at a thing, a Viking legal assembly, it wasn't just to get drunk, it was a sign of solidarity, of oaths being made, of clans uniting under sacred agreements, with the gods as witness. Feasting together meant you weren't alone, you belonged. You had a place at the fire and someone would watch your back. Even enemies might share barley before a duel, a silent nod to the gods and to honor. You may kill me, but we drink from the same earth. The women who carried the flame. In Viking life, women held immense power in the domestic and spiritual spheres. They managed stores of grain, they brewed the ale, they fed the warriors before battle. They whispered charms over pots, blending herbs into barley porridge for healing or strength. And sometimes, they were seers. Women like the Vulva, the prophetess, used food and herbs in ritual to glimpse fate itself. Barley might be laid in patterns on the floor, stirred clockwise or counterclockwise in a trance, burned while runes were cast. This wasn't superstition, it was cosmic communication, a way of aligning body, earth, and spirit. Lessons from a lost table. Today, we eat alone, quickly, mindlessly, often processed food with no history, no land, no memory. But the Vikings, brutal as they were, understood that food wasn't just survival. It was sacred. Every bowl of barley porridge tied them to the land that grew it. Every ale horn passed around the fire reinforced bonds of loyalty. Every ritual feast echoed with myth and meaning. Food was story. And maybe that's what we've lost most. Not just the grain itself, but the ritual of eating it with reverence. So the next time you sit down to eat, remember the Vikings. Not the helmets with horns, not the Hollywood warriors screaming into battle, but the real people, around a longhouse fire, holding bowls of barley in calloused hands, strong, cold, hungry, and grateful for every bite. Because in that moment, they weren't just feeding the body, they were feeding the spirit. Maybe it's time we remembered it.